Over the past few years, everything has changed. Where and how we work and live, the way we collaborate and measure success, and the emerging technologies we use to get it all done. Welcome to The Bridge. Join our host, Scott Kinka, in a series of discussions with top leaders in technology and learn about how they bridge their lives and their businesses into our new hybrid work and AI-driven reality. Our hope is that the insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading IT advisory firm. Bridgepoint helps business leaders evaluate, procure, implement, and manage technology and customer experience solutions with a focus on realizing sustainable results for your business growth. And now, here's your host, Scott Kinka.
There are various immutable laws in business. One of them is that big companies don't move fast until they have to, of course. So what happens when you take a serial entrepreneur and self-professed maverick challenger and put him in charge of business services at a Fortune 30 network and infrastructure provider? What you get is an ambition to turn a domestic cable operator into the leading global supplier of secure networking in the world, and to do it just in time to meet the challenges of hybrid work. My guest on this week's episode of The Bridge is Chris MacFarland. He's the CEO of Comcast Business, Masergy. We talk about roller coaster career rides, the needs of the mid-market, connectivity and security as equal partners in hybrid work, generative AI, and the future of energy abundance. Interesting hot take there. And in a moment of transparency, we also spend some time talking about lessons learned during the pandemic and things that he and they could have done differently. Before we jump in, though, if you like the job we're doing on this podcast, please like, subscribe, give us a rating or comment wherever you get your content. And for a glimpse into the career and trajectory of a true tech visionary, stay tuned for my conversation with Chris MacFarland, CEO of Comcast Business, Masergy. Hi, welcome to The Bridge. My guest on this episode is Chris MacFarland. Chris is the CEO of Comcast Business, Masergy. Chris and I have known each other for quite some time, hanging out at BroadSoft conferences back in the day. We'll get into that as we go. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thrilled to have you. And you're taking this call right now from Plano, Texas, not a name people generally, or a location people generally attach to Comcast, but here you are.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite interesting. With the acquisition of Masergy, there's a pretty meaningful presence here in Plano. And then for those of you that are real familiar with Comcast, we've got a huge amount of presence and infrastructure in Houston. And then within the last 90 days, we've announced a new Universal Studios in Frisco, Texas, which is about 4 miles north of where we're at from here. So, come 5 years from now, I think Texas will be a major, presence for Comcast. Granted, there's pretty much major presences all over the country today.
Well, we love hearing that. Bridgepoint has an office right on Cowboy Way. So we're neighbors in Texas as well as neighbors here in Philadelphia, not that far, but those who listen know that I'm in Westchester, Pennsylvania, not so far outside of Philadelphia, and have spent most of my career in the Philadelphia area. So, but and I want to jump into the Comcast Masergy thing, but before we do that, let's just make sure people know who you are. Tell us a little bit about Chris, your current role, and then maybe a little bit about you personally, how you arrived in your current position.
Yeah, no, thanks. Listen, I'm just a little bit north of 50 years of age. I can't believe that, I don't feel as old as I am, but I guess I am. I've got a little over 30 years in what I'd call the broader industry per se. Kind of consider myself as a serial entrepreneur, and started my first business back actually when I was in college. And what a lot of people don't know is that during my junior year of engineering school, I had to make a decision. The business I started, which was a mail order computer parts company, was growing fast enough that I really couldn't show up for class or give adequate time to study or labs. And so I made a decision to put a pause and brakes on it. And, never had to look back. But I spent most of my life in the services realm. It started out in, going from builder computer parts to building an ISP back at the very beginning of the commercialization of the internet in the early, 1990s. And then pivoted there to building, what was called a competitive local exchange company in the late 90s with a company, called Allegiance Telecom. And then was a little bit burned out at telecom in the early 2000s. I don't know if people are old as me.
We all, Chris, at that point?
Yeah. Going out?
I say, weren't we all a little bit burned out of telecom in the early 2000s? I hear you.
Yeah, and so there was a software company that I had advised and invested into that was super exciting, and that was how I think you and I met, which was during my tenure at Broadsoft. But anyway, you fast forward, and I had an opportunity to lead Masergy back in the late 2000s, and it's really been there ever since. And then about just a little bit shy of 2 years ago, I think 19 months, we completed the sale of Masergy to Comcast and became a part of the Comcast Business family. But it's been an interesting journey, but one that has had its roller coaster effects over multiple decades. But I'm still here and I'm still excited, and I still think today is probably one of the most exciting times, and if not the most interesting time in history.
I mean, it's great that you can have a career that spans that many years and that many years, attached, if you will, inside of Masergy, but you still get to kind of play entrepreneur every day. It sounds like.
No, it is fun. And the, when you think about the strategic fit that we had inside of Comcast Business, they are, the masters of the domain and the SMB space, principally around, what you would expect, connectivity. Think broadband internet and high speed, Ethernet derived internet, and then as well as, a set of managed services on top of that. And then they had a pretty robust, enterprise business that not a lot of people think about. But then there was a bit of a gap in what we call the upper market or the broader mid market around solutions. And so we feel this really nice area. And so it's been a great 19-month journey, although it's not a short journey. As you're well aware, integration is always a little bit of beating the head on the wall to make, some hard decisions. But I think we've navigated it, fairly well. And I think that the IT leaders that want to engage, if I had to make a prediction 5 years from now, I think people, when they think enterprise services and solutions, will think Comcast Business. I don't think we're there today per se. But I think we're well on that journey, and I've always been kind of the Maverick Challenger brand kind of guy, but now I've got the might of a Fortune 24 company behind us to bring that to be a reality. So it's pretty exciting.
That is really exciting. Tell me, for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, I want to get into maybe some of the rationale on the Comcast side for bringing the two sides together, and how that. I mean, you mentioned 19 months ago, which means we're reacting on the backside of, arguably the biggest change in the way we work. Is it fair to say that engaging with you all and in bringing Masergy into the Comcast Business fold may have had a little bit to do with, kind of the changing landscape of work? I mean, sort of the product need, or was it really just sort of missing that mid-market that was driving it?
So I think there's a lot of, I think it's a pretty long list. But I think first and foremost, the changing landscape of this pivot from being more than just underlying connectivity services to more advanced, what I'm going to call solutions that enhance the cyber posture and enhance the robustness of a cloud journey that every business in the world is on. Was strategically, probably number one reason why they looked at it. I think secondarily, Masergy had a 20-year history of helping design solutions and then deliver those solutions and then keep those operationally integrated with the rest of enterprises' IT stack. And I don't think you can discount, that muscle memory that got built up with, really, really high net promoter scores, right? Our customer, satisfaction rankings weren't like, they were not only best in class, across the service provider community, but they're best in class across any world-class company, arguably, across the world. And so that was really, I think, part of the reason for it is because there is this intense focus of how do you build relationships that matter. And I do believe that, Comcast Business, we serve more businesses than anybody else in North America, but, Masergy, accelerates this journey, to the upper market and to the enterprise space. And so again, and then we, we're a profitable business, not a small business, kind of a mid-cap sized company, but we still always had to make decisions when you think about kind of your 5-year roadmap, where you couldn't always really justify economically everything that you were doing because you still had, a great private equity backer, in the business, but at the same time, their horizon to how long they were going to be in the business was always shorter than what our customers and our management team was looking at.
Yeah.
And so there was always a little bit of friction there, and that's gone away. And now, we're making the decisions now for not the next, not only the next year, but the next 5 years and even a decade from where we're at today. And so us being able to meet customers where they want to be met and how they want to be met, and then being able to do some things that hasn't been in the marketplace before, or the things that, get me and I think the broader Comcast business team really jazzed up about the future.
So what, I think people generally understand Comcast, and at least on the Comcast business side, think of it as a connectivity business, largely speaking, and broadband, and fiber services at the end of the day. So aside from that mid-market focus, can you share a little bit of sort of what the superpower Masergy added from a product perspective into Comcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Because Masergy has always been, I wouldn't call it super narrowly focused, but took a little bit different perspective, which was when you think about the challenges, a large enterprise or a large mid-market business have, there's basically a few things that CIO is trying to figure out. One, how do I protect the data and my business processes and whatever intellectual property that I've got? Mm-hmm. And then secondarily, what are the things that, that I can outsource to either a managed service or to a platform that offers capabilities? And we all know about this pivot towards managed services over the last decade. We all know about the pivot more towards, software as a service, and then in certain cases, infrastructure as a service versus owning your own infrastructure. And what we've seen through this whole time period is that, the network communication platform has become, gone from being important to mission critical to now it's probably arguably the most important thing that glues, all of these cloud-based derived services together. Then when you mention COVID and what happened with the acceleration of hybrid, workplace, that changed kind of the, where people are physically at and radically changed the way that these networks need to operate. But at the same time, thinking about, how does the cybersecurity side of this really, really work? And so Masergy, for, greater than 15 years, we focused on, how do we make that journey to the cloud easier from a communication standpoint? So think network. Secondarily, how do we enhance their cybersecurity posture? Meaning, is this making them more secure, not less secure? And how does it integrate into their defense framework and their detection framework? And then lastly, how do we give them control over certain pieces of this that they've outsourced to us so that they can be, agile? And think very similar to kind of like DevOps and some of the things like, how do you make your network an enablement and your cyber security on your network an enablement component and not a roadblock? Because when you look back in time over the last 50 years, you look at like surveys to CIOs and network leaders and IT leaders, the network was the number one reason why people said no to new projects in the pre-cloud era.
Yeah.
And so we felt like there was this unique moment in time, circa 2010 to where we're at today, and probably for at least another decade, if not another 15 years, where, this should be a strategic component. Just like if you want to use infrastructure as service for elastic compute and storage, that is a strategic thing that you have in your business state, that your business demands that. where your network should never be the reason why you say no to something. It should be the reason why you can go make that next acquisition of another company. I would tell you that 80% of our customers historically have had an M&A transaction occur in the last 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our platform allows for that M&A process to occur at a much rapid pace on the integration side because of the modularity that we built back into this platform. But in today, you were seeing things called secure SD-WAN and unified comms and kind of the network security components being the core solutions that most of our customers come to us for us to help. I don't know if that makes complete sense, Scott, but that's kind of the domain that we play in.
No, it totally does. I mean, I always saw Masergy. We'll tie back to Comcast in a minute. I always saw Masergy as sort of boutique network builders, and I mean that. I hope you take that for what it's meant. Meaning, you solved particularly hard problems, right? You'd leverage other people's network. You had own network. You had POPs globally. You'd creatively build networks, however you get there, and then you'd build managed services around it, right? Automation, monitoring. Building it into a single network framework, dealing with security. So I wonder, when I think about that and I equate it back to Comcast, this is going to seem like a counterintuitive question for people who are thinking about Comcast kind of as a ubiquitous network provider, depending on where they are. But in a lot of ways, did Masergy expand Comcast's reach to be able to build global networks for customers?
Yeah, the answer to that is a definitive yes. Probably might make sense for me to give you a little more insight about, that career trajectory of mine and what it meant at Masergy, because early in my career, ISP days was mostly focused on residential users. Granted, it was a small geography in North Texas. And then right after that, I was part of a team that did an ISP roll-up, across the country and then even parts of the world, and that was mostly focused on SMB. And then the C-like days, that was still mostly SMB with a bit of an entree into the mid-market. And then as I pivoted away from that into Masergy, we started looking at the opportunity, and I agree with you, it was very, in the early days, it was pretty niche. We were really focused on multinational, preferably global customers. One of our marketing things was, we'll deliver Ethernet to you anywhere in the world. And, we've proven that over time. We deliver services in over 100 countries. And so we also said, well, what are the hardest things they're trying to solve? And we made a decision strategically, and I'm sure you've probably read the book around, Blue Oceans. As I said, literally went to a couple of the enterprise services websites and said, we're going to do everything they say they won't do or don't want to do. And part of that was, how do you tackle an area that we thought was underserved, which is small enterprise, how you define it, maybe upper mid-market, and those that are growing because they've got global aspirations or they are truly global in nature. And so we decided that if we could solve the most complex problems in the world, there was probably a business that could evolve from that. And so we went from being, boutique or niche, depending on how you want to look at it, early on, I had several of my friends at much larger companies that would call us ankle biters. But over time, we built a reputation for, not only delivering on our promises, but being able to do things that nobody else would want to do, because they always said, it's all about, trying to sweat more profit out of the fiber I put into the ground. And we're like, well, really shouldn't it be about the applications if you take a customer lens? And so when you fast forward to today, there are several components that we gave Comcast. One, true global reach. Comcast before was mostly focused, up until about 6 years ago, just their own MSAs where they had dense fiber. Mm-hmm. And then about 5 years ago, they started focused on what we historically in the industry would call off-net, meaning locations anywhere, at least in North America. And then with the acquisition of Masergy, now it's truly a global footprint. And so I think our aspirations, when you double click into, Comcast, business, is to be the leading global supplier of secure networking in the world. Yeah. And I think Masergy plays a major role in that story, as it continues to unfold.
Yeah, I think that's a huge takeaway for me. I think a lot of our listeners, probably think of Comcast delivering services on Comcast, wires in the ground or on poles. You know what I mean? And the reality of it is you guys are basically saying yes and right. And then wrapping all of that in managed services and, building in, a ubiquitous, if you will, network, regardless of whether that's Comcast territory or not. And, providing it at a level that meets the more stringent requirements of a mid-market, to smaller enterprise business. Well, that's super interesting. And given what's going on in hybrid work, the office has changed pretty significantly, right? So we're talking about connectivity. And I think, so much of the connectivity game over most of your history has been about what's the smartest way to connect shiny buildings together. And those technologies have changed over time, but the principal tenet of wiring up buildings is still, has historically still been there. And obviously you mentioned a couple times that that's changed. Let's read back a little bit on that, if you wouldn't mind. How has, what are the things in the Comcast portfolio now that you would say are, have more focus, just given the fact that maybe not everybody's in a big shiny building every day? Is there anything that you guys are working on to tie in the rest of what you're doing to really get the home user, onto the network as well?
Yeah, no, Scott, I think we live in, interesting times to say, right? And, when you go back to early 2020, and you think about the beginning of the pandemic, listen, we've always had road warriors, right? We've always had executives that were, in every industry flying around doing, business deals all over the globe. But what you didn't have was, you may have people with second or third homes that were doing a little bit of, remote work, but not 2 or 3 days a week, or during COVID, in many cases, 24/7 from their house. And so we saw a couple of interesting things, right? And Comcast was the beneficiary of it. Masergy was the beneficiary of it as well, which was the second, people needed to truly try to work as efficiently, in some cases more efficiently from home, their network demands inside of the house dramatically grew. But so does kind of like, how do they get into the corporate network? Most companies have, VPN clients or SSL VPN clients. Most of them were, I would say, politely, not built for 100% of the workforce to be at home. Yeah. And so we saw, our VPN platforms grow, by 5 to 10x in geographies within 14 days when the pandemic grew. I think Comcast, and this is all public information, they saw significant growth in demand, for bandwidth in the house, people upgrading or connecting, new services, which kind of what you would expect. And then I think every leader in the world, especially North America, we were all trying to figure out, well, how do we make our daily meetings, all the stuff that's kind of serendipitous in the hallways. How do you restructure and organize, for this, work from home, environment? And I think we all struggled. I can tell you, for me personally, early on, I was sitting here in front of a video camera 8 to 10 hours a day, not moving, probably being about as unhealthy as you can be when you think about just how we're supposed to, live our lives. And it only took me about a month, and I'm like, I'm not getting on any more video calls unless it's like a real important group meeting. I'm going to try to do as much as I can back on, like old school. Maybe it's because I'm older, with my cell phone, so I can at least walk around, my house, my yard, while I'm trying to, do business, whether it's internally, externally. And so I think we all kind of need to figure out, like, how do we make things, thrive? And then as I think we're still in it. We're kind of in the pandemic hangover years right now. We're in this world today. We're in hybrid workforce, right? Even when you think about Comcast, we're, unless for most groups and employees, we've got kind of this 3-day in the office, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then, Monday and Fridays are kind of optional. If I'm in town, I usually opt to come into the office. Mostly because I have really big dogs, not anything, because, I've got pretty good infrastructure at the house too. But I also like being around people. And I think that's the other thing is that, I'm slightly introverted if you do the extrovert-introvert scale, but I prefer to be around people, to collaborate, to spend time, to socialize a little bit too, above and beyond work. But I think every leader that I've worked with, both as customers, I'm in some peer-to-peer organizations with, YPO and other things. We've all struggled. We all struggled returning back to the office. Like we saw more talent leave when we announced return to office than I think any of us expected. We had a lot more people threatened that didn't. But I think everybody's, been challenged. And I know you've seen some financial institutions take a hard line, and other. But the reality is that I don't think hybrid working is going to go away. I think we've proven that people, for more professional type jobs and roles are more efficient doing work from home than not. It has expanded, what they need from a communication standpoint. So if you're a cloud communications company, I think it's been net big positive for you. If you're in video conferencing, net big positive. If you're in connectivity, which we are, it's been a big net positive. And I think for cyber, VPN, and other services, I think it's been a big net positive. And I don't think it's going to necessarily go away. You and I, being in this industry for, decades, we've always figured out a way to work from wherever we're at, right? Yeah. And so I think we had a little bit of an advantage, although it was nicer when it was optional, not dictated on you.
Sure.
And I think now, the big question for a bunch of us is like, okay, well, we're going to stay 3 and 2, or we're going to do 4 and 1. I think there are some industries where it makes sense to go back 5 days a week. And then I think, as there's plenty of, newer startups that are 100% virtual now.
Yeah.
And I think those companies are dealing with how do you build a culture, that's different. I think the cultural challenges far outweigh the broader challenges. Can you build a culture that can really, achieve what it's trying to do for its customers and for its product development and those other things. But, I think we got a couple more years to figure some of these things out. It will be really, really interesting to see what takes place. But for those of us that are IT leaders, the challenges are like, how do you make the right pivots and how do you make sure you've got the agility in your cyber communications and networking components so that no matter which way that business goes, you're set up for success.
Completely. And there were 2 primary topics in there. One was cultural and one was sort of IT stance. I'll ask a quick question on each one and then we'll get to some fun. On the cultural side, and you can say no to the question. I'm going to preface that. Are there any mistakes you think that you ran into, whether it was Masergy before the acquisition or maybe Masergy and Comcast or Comcast since, kind of things that you'd maybe unwind or at least lessons learned from your experiences in trying hybrid work from a cultural perspective?
Yes. A couple of massive mistakes. I think that I wasn't the only one that this occurred with. I think when we went to a virtual environment where people were working almost exclusively from home, we didn't set expectations properly at the beginning of that process that we're doing this just because of COVID. As soon as we're past the pandemic, the expectation will be to come back to the return to office in some form or fashion. And I think the time lag that it took for that to come, how we had to incentivize people to return. And then, it's pretty interesting because human nature, right? By unless you're an inventor and somebody who's always wanting to change to be more efficient or to build something new that the market wants, which, I lean more into that category than the latter category, which is you like to do things a certain way and you get into a certain rhythm and habits, and those habits are hard to break. Well, I think when we forced people to work from home, not only did they see the upsides to their day jobs, but I think they also saw dramatic changes to their personal lives. Yeah. I think 1, they were with their families a whole lot more. 2, they either had pets or they got new pets while they were, during this environment because they wanted more, more social interaction around them. Thirdly, I think in densely populated areas, we saw a lot of people move a little bit more into suburban and in some cases rural areas just to lower their cost of, their household expenses. And so when we started having people, initially optionally come back, return to office, and then mandated, we started seeing all these HR issues pop up, where you're like, well, wait a minute, how did we get to this point to where we had, I'll just keep a number generic, but I think every business in North America saw 5% of their workforce move to a different spot. In some cases, different states. And you're like, well, that works in a whole 100% virtual world, but when you're trying to get people, 3 or 4 days in the office, that doesn't work. And so I think if we had to set expectations better up front that this was temporary, please don't think this is the natural course, because we saw way too many of the workforce just expect the world to stay this way.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. Yeah. And so I think that's just a big challenge. I think everybody had to deal with it. And now we're dealing with the artifacts, of that. And then I do think people, different roles, different jobs take different things. And I forgot the second one.
Well, it's funny because you handed me the direct tie into the next question, right? Which is on the network side. I mean, you guys are in a 3 and 2 right now, or a 3 in required, 2 optional. And I'm out with customers all the time. We're talking about planning all of their tech, whether it's the network or, like you said, the collaboration and communication side. I think what's been interesting is that, I often ask the question of IT people, has your chief executive officer, board of directors, executive leadership team made a decision on what hybrid work actually is right now? And I always ask that question because, say I'm trying to accomplish this or I'm trying to accomplish that. I don't know how you accomplish the job on the IT side until you really know what you're building for. I mean, effectively, you're in a stance right now. You're in 3-2 in terms of days, but you're in 100 and 100 in terms of the percent of people you're building for being remote and being in the office, right? I mean, effectively, you have 2 completely different, largely speaking, network and security stances for the business right now. Is that a fair way of stating that?
It's not only is it a fair way of stating it, but I can also tell you that, we started building a solution that we just now are bringing to the market because of COVID and this new environment, which is, we built, and Masergy's had this for a long time, is how do we really harden, a large enterprise so that they're networking. And right now it's called, secure software-defined WAN. There's some components of SASE into it, but one of the things that the acquisition of Comcast allowed us to do is how do we think about the different services and solutions that we have for different size customers? And then, we just launched a service called Secure Network Edge. It's aimed at, small offices, single locations, or it could be the residential business user, where it's just a more secure way to connect to the internet and to that business. And then secondarily, it gives them resiliency. Whereas today, that could be, hopefully your cable company with broadband internet, and we can give you a 4G or 5G card, or you can have Ethernet and broadband, and still have fixed wireless backup. But we think that enhancing your security posture and enhancing your resiliency kind of relegates, business internet. And I don't know about you, but I can remember how many times I was on a video conference call, and it would pause, or it would stutter, or I'm on a really important prospect or existing customer, and they would just go away. Right. I think the broadband infrastructure held up really, really well, but there were still points in time where it wasn't the same business experience that we all expect that we're in offices communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So being able to really enhance that capability for professional users at home, small businesses, and what I'd call the lower end of the mid-market is something that, I'm super excited about, that we're, with as being a part of Comcast Business, we're able to bring, this service solution to the lowest end. And it's built off of technology that we've been using for enterprises for years. So it's not like we're introducing something new. We're just able to make it affordable enough and packaged enough to where, a home user can use it.
That's amazing. Chris, I could keep going. you and I've had a lot of these conversations over the years, but in the interest of our listenership, we try and get them off in about a half hour to 40 minutes. So I'm going to jump into some fun, if that's okay.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So maybe this is the bridge to the fun, but can you give me a shameless prediction for the next 18 to 24 months? It doesn't need to be, it could be business related or industry related or technology related, but it could be sports related or politics, wherever you want to go. 18 to 24 months. What's going to happen?
I'm going to stay away from politics because I think we're in a sad space. No matter.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
But I think on the more exciting, there's two huge things occurring right now that I think are incredible. That we're going to see this, next couple of years, and definitely the remainder of this decade. One, I know everybody's talking about AI right now with ChatGPT and large language models and generative AI. I think the impact it's going to make on what they call personalized medicine, where we're going to start to see this shift from generic meds to things that are aimed at like your DNA or my DNA, is going to change lifespan and longevity in ways that we could never imagine. And that really, really gets me excited, especially somebody who's a little bit over the age of 50. I not only do I want to live for many decades to come, but I want the quality of life to be incredibly high. And I think if you read a little bit about Tony Robbins with Peter Diamandis just put out a book called Lifespan. I think it's an incredible read. I think there's doctors like David Sinclair that's really working on how do we slow down our biological clocks? And I think they've made some major breakthroughs that are going to get announced in the next 18 months. And those are things that I think are super exciting. And I think the other one is that there's going to be a big energy breakthrough of some sort. There's a few different areas, but I think we're on the precipice in the next 2 to 4 years that there's going to be, and I'll steal Peter Diamandis' view. There's going to be this age of abundance on energy that's coming that has such a huge impact on underlying economics in our world that we'll begin that true shift from the feeling of scarcity to this feeling of abundance. And again, I think as exciting as the last 10 years have been for me, I think the next 10 years for all of us are going to be even more exciting.
That was a incredible and super hopeful answer, which I like. You also, by the way, answered my 2 questions from now. I was going to ask you, what's on your end table? What are you reading right now? And I think you just told me the book Lifespan. You said who's the author there?
It's Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis, but I think Peter had a bigger set of inputs to that book. Not that Tony Robbins isn't great, but
I get it.
I think his fingerprints are all over that one. So.
Understood. All right. Well, then I'm going to leave you with one fun question. And it's a little bit of an odd question given your hopeful answer just now, but let's just assume that the future doesn't go the way that you expect. And we hit the next dystopian event, whatever that is. And there's one app that's still functioning on your phone. What's your end of the world app, Chris? What can you not live without on your mobile?
I mean, it's got to be the same for everyone in today's age, especially if you've got kids. Yeah. I mean, you need iMessage, right? So that's the one app I don't think any of us, or at least not me, I couldn't live without.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, well, that makes sense. And we got the nightstand reading answer in the middle of that. I love it. Personalized medicine and energy breakthrough. Well, excited about both. And it's funny, too, because you mentioned AI. I mean, I just did a talk a couple of weeks ago on AI, and one of the questions that I got asked, it happened to be, by the way, in Dallas. But one of the questions I got, why now? And we were talking about, computing power and processing getting to the point, but also energy. Like it takes an awful lot of energy to power the generative models that are powering the things that are happening right now. Right. I mean, these are GPUs, not CPUs we're powering, to be able to do this stuff. So it was just a really interesting question. I mean, when all this stuff comes together, the future is really bright, and certainly the future bright in Comcast Business and Masergy land with, a collection of some really awesome companies and some really incredible talent. Chris, happy to have you on the show today, and best of luck in everything that in the future for Comcast Business and Masergy.
Thank you very much. It's always great chatting with you too as well, Scott.
Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.